Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillah. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Sayyidina Rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. Welcome back to our reading of this great book of our Tariq, the Principles of Tasawwuf, Qawa'id al-Tasawwuf by Sidi Ahmad Zarruq radiyallahu anhu. We ended in the last class, we concluded section 2. Now this is section 3, in which he's going to talk about the substance of Tasawwuf, inshaAllah. And if you're following along in the book, this is principle 32 on page 24. قال المصنف رحمه الله ونفعنا بعلومه في الدارين آمين. Sidi Ahmad Zarruq, he says, may Allah Ta'ala have mercy on him and may we benefit from his knowledge in this world and in the next. The fundamental nature of a discipline is deducible from its principles. So if you want to learn about what a certain subject is about, or a certain science as we call it in the Sharia, we're going to look at what are the principles of that science to answer that question. It might share with another discipline the same fundamental nature and differ from it as regards its methods of argumentation, as in the example of jurisprudence, Sufism, and theology. So fiqh, jurisprudence, in both al-furu' and usul, both the sort of positive law and the theory of the law. Tasawwuf, which is the subject that we're talking about. Theology, ilm al-kalam, or aqidah sometimes it's called. These have, at the end of the day, essentially the same meta principles, but they are going to be different in its methods of argumentation. And this is very important because sometimes when people study the Sharia a little bit, they think that there are differences. But when you study a lot and you get deeper and deeper and deeper, you start to realize that all of the disciplines, all of the sciences are saying the same thing, but they're coming at it from different principles. So that's very, very important. So he says, continuing, their principles are the book, meaning the Quran, and the Sunnah, and the approved legal decisions based on the Quran and Sunnah. But the jurist considers ascertaining the exoteric rule applicable to outward action insofar as the rule requires it. So the job of the faqih is to tell you that this action is compatible with the Sharia. That's all. They're looking at the external act. They're not looking at anything else. And that's the job of the faqih. That's the purview of jurisprudence. The Sufi considers things from the perspective of the truth, with a capital T, in the very nature of realization. So the Sufi is concerned with the heart of the act, the inner disposition of the person when they're acting, the meaning of the act. Yes, it must be compliant with the Sharia, but from the perspective of Tasawwuf, that's not enough. It's not enough that you simply do things that you're supposed to do, pro forma, without having the proper intention, the proper, concentration, etc. The jurist cannot consider things from this point of view until his outer and inner being are united. The theologian considers the issues of negation and affirmation and nothing else. Like, can we affirm that this is part of our belief, or do we negate that this is part of our belief? As a result of all of that, Ibn al-Jalla radiallahu anhu said, whoever deals with both God and creatures using esoteric truth is a heretic. Whoever deals with both God and creatures using the law is a traditionalist. And whoever deals with God using the esoteric truth and with creatures using the law is a Sufi. This is a remarkable and appropriate to the precious observations. Examples of this will appear later. So, again, this is a theme that Zarruq has been talking about since the beginning when we began the book. That you cannot deal with people in your day-to-day life only from the point of view of the haqiqah. That's why we have the Sharia. The Sharia is the judge between us. The Sharia is what unites us as Muslims, that is. The Sharia is what we all agree upon. The Sharia is that which there can be no dispute about. When there's a Sharia ruling, there's a Sharia ruling. When the Mufti gives a fatwa, then the Mufti is given a fatwa. So on and so forth. It's simple. It's like when you go to court. You don't go to court and you're like have some kind of commercial legal dispute with somebody, and they're pulling up like Aristotle's metaphysics, and you're using that. You don't do that. You just say, what does the letter of the law say, and that's how you rule. So when it comes to our day-to-day life, and especially with Muslims, but also our day-to-day life with people in general, we are going to always deal with the exterior things. And vice versa. If you only did that, if you only did the Sharia and you gave nothing else a thought, then you're also going to be limited. But you deal rather your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala based on the haqiqah, and then your dealings with everybody else based on the law, based on the exterior of the law. And that's how, therefore, you have balanced. Now, she translates, she says traditionalist. Whoever deals with both God and creatures using the law is a traditionalist. This is not a good translation because the Arabic is a Sunni. So, of course, we are Sunni Muslims, and this is the madhab of Zarruq, of course, without doubt. So he's saying that a Sunni, the way that a exoteric Sunni, a Sunni that's only dealing with the law, is somebody that is going to worship Allah Ta'ala only with the exterior and deal with people only with the exterior. Meaning that I'm going to make sure that I prayed my 5 prayers, I made wudu before my 5 prayers, I fasted the month of Ramadan, I did what I needed to do, kind of just very superficially. But the Sufi is like, well, did I really fast? Was my heart present? Did I really concentrate when I made wudu, etc.? So when you worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you and yourself, between you and Allah ta'ala, then you need to accentuate the rules of the tariq, the rules of the haqiqah, etc. Okay, principle 33. Only through an example can a thing be made manifest, and only through proof can it be supported. An example of the heretic is he who rejects free will, al-Jabari. So the people, there was a sect of people that negated free will, and that's obviously a heretical belief because we are taken into account for our decisions, so therefore we have free will. An example of the heretic is the person who rejects free will, who abrogates wisdom and general rules. An example of the traditionalist, again, Sunni, meaning somebody that's living by the letter of the law, is illustrated in the hadith, which is considered sound, of what befell the 3 men in the cave whose entrance had been blocked, when Allah Ta'ala asked each one of them his best deeds. The soundness of the hadith is to be found in the self-evident proofs used by way of encouraging the love and fear of God, but God knows best. So this hadith is that 3 men were stuck in a cave, and they entered a cave, and then a big boulder came and blocked the door of the cave. So each of them, they turned to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in dua, and each of them mentioned an act that they believed was the purest act that they ever did, that this was an act solely for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And they asked Allah ta'ala by that purity of that act to help relieve them. So each person made dua, the boulder moved a little bit, until they were able to go out. So he's saying the person who is only concerned with the letter of the law, it's like this hadith. An example of the Sufi is illustrated in the hadith telling the story of a man who borrowed 1,000 dinars from another man. The borrower said, "Help me find a witness for this transaction." And the lender replied, "God suffices as a witness." The borrower said, "Help me find a guarantor." The lender said, "God suffices as a guarantor." So the borrower accepted the conditions. When the deadline for the loan had expired, the man went out to search for a boat, but was unable to find one. So he made a hole in a piece of wood and placed 1,000 dinars in it, along with a note telling the story, leaving it to the care of the one with whom he was content, who was Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it arrived at its destination. Then the borrower gave the lender another 1,000 dinars, thus faithfully fulfilling his obligation towards the law. So it's in Bukhari, both hadith. Right? So in that hadith, right, the lender he has absolute trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Forget about the pro forma. Right? Forget about the fact that you need a guarantor and we need witnesses on the contract. This is fillah. This is for the sake of Allah. Allah is with us. I trust you, and inshallah, it's halal. You're a good person. It's gonna come back, and it came back. And there was that excess to do more of the transactions. So that's the difference between the Sufi and the Sunni. Right? The Sunni are the people in the cave that they are thinking, okay, I did this one act, I did it for you, Ya Allah, it was pure, so help me. So you're looking for a worldly transaction based on something that you did. Whereas the Sufi is not thinking of a transaction, he is only thinking of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I hope you can see the difference. The Sunni in the example is good. They did something good, but they are using that good and kind of drawing down on the deed now in this world. Ya Allah, I helped an old lady cross the street. Wasn't that a pure act? Ya Allah, if it was a pure act, help me out like in this thing that I'm stuck in now. Okay? So there's still like an eye towards, it's transactional. The Sufis are, Allah is the witness, Allah is the guarantor, no problem. Right? Complete trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and it comes back. Okay. Continuing with the text. A similar illustration is we feed you إِنَّمَا نُطْعِمُكُمْ لِوَجْهِ اللَّهِ لَا نُرِيدُ مِنْكُمْ جَزَاءً وَلَا شُكُورًا. That verse. A similar illustration is we feed you only for the sake of Allah Ta'ala. We desire no recompense from you, no thankfulness, for we fear our Lord. Thus, the one who dedicates himself to practicing the fear of God is made to seem devoid of intelligence, but Allah Ta'ala knows. So, the verse talks about charitable giving and that people are feeding the poor, etc., and they seek nothing in return. They're doing it lillah, they're doing it for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay, continue with the text. A man once asked Shibli radiallahu anhu, how much zakah should I pay on 5 camels? So zakah, there is zakah on livestock, camels, cattle, sheep and goat. Right? Those are the categories of livestock in which we pay zakah. So with zakah, there's always going to be something called the nisab, the minimal zakatable amount. So he's like, what's the, how much, if I have 5 camels, how much zakah do I have to pay on the 5 camels? So he said, 1 sheep is your legal obligation. So Shibli is responding, the Sharia tells you 1 sheep. If you have 5 camels, you pay 1 sheep. But for us, everything belongs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The man asked, what is the religious basis of your statement? And Shibli replied, when Abu Bakr left all of his wealth behind, it was for the sake of God and His Messenger. So on the night of the Hijrah, when Sayyidina Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu was going with Rasulullah sallallahu outside of Mecca and going towards Medina, Sayyidina Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu had exhausted all of his wealth, everything that he owned to prepare for the journey. He left nothing behind. He had 0. He left Mecca with no possessions. Anything that he had, he was liquidated and he used it for the provisions for the journey to Medina. So Al-Shibli is saying, when he's reciting this story, he said, well, when Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu left with the Prophet ﷺ, he left all of his wealth behind. It was for the sake of Allah and His Messenger ﷺ. And then he added, whoever turns his back on all of his wealth, his model is Abu Bakr. Whoever casts aside some of it, thereby abandoning some of it, his model is Umar radiallahu anhu. Whoever takes, gives, collects, and withholds for the sake of God, his model is Uthman. Sayyidina Uthman radiallahu anhu was one of the wealthiest of the companions. Whoever leaves the world to its partitions, to the people of the dunya, his model is Imam Ali alayhi salam. Every kind of knowledge that does not lead to the abandonment of the world is not knowledge. This is a magnificent comment on the subject. Okay, so the story of Al-Shibli and the Zakah, the same story is also told about Imam Shafi'i. That Imam Shafi'i was, I can't remember the person he asked, but he was asking a saintly person, they were looking at some livestock, and Imam Shafi'i said, same thing, how much zakah is on all of this? And the Shafi'i said, X number of cattle. And then the man said, well, for us, all of it is for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it's a repeated story, different narrations. Just kind of flagging that, because sometimes if you hear me speak, I cite that story and I attribute it to Imam Shafi'i. Anyway, so there is the exterior. Okay, if I have, $10,000 and I've saved it, how much zakat do I have to pay? And okay, there's the mechanics of the law, right? And as Muslims, we have to do that. But there's another perspective, right? The other perspective is I don't want any attachment to the dunya. So he gives us the example of the four main companions, the Khulafa, Sayyidina Abu Bakr, Sayyidina Umar, Sayyidina Uthman, and Imam Ali alayhi salam. So, Sayyidina Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu gave it all away. Umar, some gave some and kept some. Sayyidina Uthman, wealthy, so there's a lot of transactions coming. He was like an enterprise. Things were coming, things were going. He equipped an entire army. The army of Al-Usra, he equipped the whole army himself. And there's still more money. Trading and all of this, that's Sayyidina Uthman. And then this is obviously the Sunni perspective. The Sunni perspective of Imam Ali alayhi salam is that Imam Ali left the dunya for the people of the dunya. He had the power of the Khilafah. He has spiritual authority by consensus of all the Muslims, and all of the major chains of transmission of tasawwuf, including our tariq, come from Imam Ali alayhi salam. So the model of Imam Ali is he left the dunya for the people of the dunya. So and he says it's a magnificent comment on the subject. It's a beautiful kind of little teaching moment to remind us that don't be attached to the dunya. But you not being attached to the dunya might look different depending on where you are in life, depending on what's happening. Some people, they're wealthy. They can't help but be wealthy. They were born into some kind of wealth, and they have some kind of job, and they have a certain lifestyle that they have to maintain for their family and their parents and their siblings. It says there's nothing wrong with that. So right away, your model is Sayyidina Uthman. What did he do? And there were some people who had no fear, right? Sayyidina Abu Bakr, she's like, forget it. I don't need any of this. Not only did Sayyidina Abu Bakr give all of his wealth, actually the story, his father, who was not Muslim, was blind. So his father said, what have you left your family? So Sayyidina Abu Bakr put stones in a bucket, and he said, oh, I left them this. So his father, who's blind, he's picking up the bucket thinking that it's all of this money. He's like, oh, okay, yeah, good. You left him something. Right, so he left, he had no qualms whatsoever. He's like, I'm all in. Right? There are people that are like that. And then there are people like Sayyidina Umar who, he did the best with what he had, and he gave some, and so on and so forth. And keep in mind that those four Sahaba also had different personalities. So it's very important when you read the seerah that you understand that Sayyidina Uthman radiallahu anhu came from a wealthy family, a wealthy clan. He was born into luxury, and he was just used to that. And there was nothing wrong with it. That's just how he was. Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu was the exact opposite. He was a very frugal person from the beginning. Naturally, that's what was his disposition. Sayyidina Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu is this very, elderly, stately companion, and had a very soft heart. And then Imam Ali was a lion. A lion who, when the power came to him, he did what he needed to do, and at the same time, he wasn't vying for the dunya, because from the Sunni interpretation, even though he felt that he had the right to be the first Khalifa, he went along with the community, the first, the second, and the third Khalifa. That's the Sunni interpretation, which we believe is sound. Okay. Next one, 34. So he says, rahimahullah, the silence of a man who knows a particular field of knowledge is better than his discussing it if he does not connect its branches to its origins. Every science that we have, when we teach from the Sharia perspective, whether they are Sharia sciences or non-Sharia sciences, this is how Muslims understand knowledge, that everything has its principles and its branches. You have to understand the principles of the discipline, because the principles of the discipline regulate everything that's going to be said and done within the discipline. So that when you find something that's a branch, you have to be able to connect it back to its principle. If you can't connect it back to its principle, if it's not connectable, then the branch is wrong. Something you've done, either you've misunderstood something, or there's a contradiction, or something is incorrect. So it's very important to link those two things together. So we call the principles the usul of a subject, any subject, and the branches the furu'a, the branches that stem from that principle. This is a very Muslim thing, right? This is how we look at the world and how we understand knowledge. So it's better for the person to be quiet if they can't link. Continue with the text. If he does not investigate the origin through its branches, if he does not connect the intellectual content with the traditional form, thereby connecting the tradition to its inner sources, if he does not submit his understanding of that particular field to what he knows the experts therein have concluded, if you can't do all of that, be silent. Then you really don't know enough to speak. And I think it was Ibn Rushd, the philosopher, or it was Al-Ghazali. He had a little bit of philosophy, but Al-Ghazali, someone of them said, if people who don't know were silent, then disputes would lessen. So the reason we have disputation is because stupid people speak. That's the way I say it. People that have no right speaking, speak. They make a YouTube channel, they have a podcast, they have a social media account, right? So they think that because I can speak, I should speak, and therefore, people start clashing with one another. The ulama, by the way, the people that we study with, very rarely do they debate, because some things are so dumb, there's no point debating. It's just so evidently wrong. Anyway, otherwise, continue with the text. Otherwise, he is closer to error than to correctness, quicker to stray than to be guided, unless he limits himself to the traditional form stripped of ambiguity and vagueness. Many a transmitter of jurisprudence has not been a jurisconsult, yet his transmission was accepted while his doctrine was not, and success comes through Allah Ta'ala. Meaning, there are people that narrate the information, but they might not necessarily understand the full extent of the information. So there is a role from transmitting, and that's how all of our science, our disciplines come to us. It comes through isnad, it comes through chains of transmission. Just because somebody transmitted a hadith, it doesn't mean that they're a master of hadith. Just because somebody transmitted a madhab or a fiqh position doesn't mean that they're like a mujtahid or a mufti. And this goes back directly to the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ in his final khutbah in the Hajj, when he said ﷺ, فَلْيُبَلِّغْ الشَّاهِدِ الْغَائِبِ. So let the person who is present narrate to those who are not present what I have said, because maybe somebody is carrying information and they will give it to somebody who's more knowledgeable than they are. So for us, in the Islamic sciences, there is something called a riwayah, transmission or narration. I heard Abdullah say, and I'm telling you guys, or forget that, the Shaykh told me today, and he actually called me today. When we finished the recording, I'll tell you, he sent me on a wild goose chase today. It was hilarious. When I stop the formal recording, I'll tell you what happened. So I say to you guys, the Shaykh told me 1, 2, 3 today. I'm narrating. That's called riwayah. Then there is diraya, understanding what is narrated. They're two separate disciplines. So there are people that can narrate the hadith. We use these terms usually in hadith, but they can apply to all disciplines. So you go sit with an older sheikh and you get the ijazah in the hadith collections, and you read, like if you go to a sheikh, he'll say, read for me from the Shama'il of At-Tirmidhi, or read some of the introduction to Sahih Muslim, so that you have established the sunnah of reading to the sheikh and he's listening to you. And then he says, okay, I give you the ijazah. When he gives you the ijazah, it doesn't mean that you're like the hafiz of, it doesn't mean like you're Bukhari. It just means that you are able to narrate. That's separate from understanding. So Zarruq is telling us something very important. It's a little bit more specific to the Islamic sciences, but it's also a great rule of thumb in general. Don't speak if you don't understand, and distinguish between I am narrating, passing on information, versus I am telling you what to do. Okay, and then we'll do one more for today, 35. So he says, a practical application, a fara or a branch, so a practical application is to be considered in light of the fundamental principle, the asl. So again, the principle and the branch. And the general rule. So when we establish a link between a principle and a branch, usually we also establish rules, like protocols and principles and axioms and things like that. If it agrees with its principle, it's accepted. If not, it's referred back to its proponent. If he is worthy, or if it is accepted, it is interpreted in accordance with his standing, or if his rank in knowledge and religion is lofty, his word is authoritative. So we have to reconcile what is said. If we read something in the books of tasawwuf, or if I teach you something in our tarbiyah or in our suluk, and it doesn't make sense to you, then you say, ask, well, where did you get this from? Well, how does this jive with the principles of Islam? Where is this in the Quran and the Sunnah? So now my job is to help you understand, or I could have made a mistake, or say, no, there are these teachings in the Quran and the Sunnah. Don't we read 1, 2, 3, 4 in the Quran and 1, 2, 3, 4 in the Hadith? And then I help make this link, so then we can establish a set of rules. Now, sometimes people don't know how to do that. So we also have to, in the back of our minds, understand that naturally some people will just be authoritative. And that's how legal authority, spiritual authority, scholarship authority is established in Islam. People that are trusted because their scholarship is vast, etc. Okay, continuing with the text. Thus, the extremists amongst the Sufis are like the people of erroneous opinions amongst the theologians and the defamed amongst the jurists. Their doctrine is to be refuted and their behavior is to be avoided. The true, certain way is not to be abandoned because of their relations with it or because of their appearance therein, but God knows best. So, if you see an extremist amongst the Sufis, that doesn't negate tasawwuf. That's what he's saying. If you see a person of great innovation in theology that has heretical beliefs, that doesn't negate, the science of ilm al-kalam or theology. And if you find a jurist who has made grave mistakes and misguided people based on their legal opinions, it doesn't negate the veracity of the Sharia as a subject. Because we're always having this exchange of establishing the principle and then finding the branches of that subject and then linking them together. And then when we link them, we develop what we call qawa'id, principles. And actually when we teach fiqh, we have a subject called qawa'id al-fiqh, the rules of fiqh. They're like when I was growing up, we had these things called cliff notes. Maybe the older people will know what I'm talking about. But whenever we'd have to read like a book in English class that we thought was difficult, we would go to the bookstore and we would buy these very thin yellow, they were like yellow and black, they were called cliff notes. It was like a summary of the book, okay? So the qawa'id, the principles are like cliff notes. As a student, you memorize all of these qawa'id, and whenever you come across something that looks like it, you remember, oh, we have this principle. Like, I'll give you an example. One of our principles in fiqh is al-yaqeen, al-yaqeenu la yazulu bil-shak. Certainty is not violated by doubt. This is a legal principle. Well, what does that mean? Because sometimes it's abstract. What does that mean? So somebody comes to me and they say, I made wudu in the morning before I left for work, and several hours passed and dhuhr came in and I forgot if I had wudu. What should I do? So what's my answer? I said, no, you have to pray, you have wudu. He says, how do you know? I say, because we have a principle. Al-yaqeenu la yazulu bil-shak. Certainty is not violated with doubt. You had certainty that you made wudu in the morning, but then later on you have doubt that you lost your wudu. This doubt cannot conquer this certainty, so you go with certainty. Or another example of the same principle. People will say, sometimes when I pray, I forget what rak'ah I'm on. So what's the response? You default to the lower number. Why? Because certainty is not violated by doubt. So if I'm doubting if I'm in the second rak'ah or the third rak'ah, where is certainty? Well, certainty will be in the less. Because the less is more certain than then the more. Maybe I prayed 3, but for sure I prayed 2. Same philosophy. So these principles you start to memorize. And in Tasawwuf, that's what it's called. Qawa'id at-Tasawwuf. This whole book is just a book of principles of, they're very wordy. I gave you a very brief example, but that's what this whole book is. This whole book is simply principles of Sufism, as it's translated, to help you kind of keep in mind how to regulate the link between the principle and the branches. The principle for us is we want to have an honest turning to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we want to attach ourselves to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's the principle, the main principle of tasawwuf. And then the branches are all of the questions that we have, that we ask one another, and then linking those two together. Okay, so we'll end here, inshallah. Wallahu ta'ala a'la wa a'lam. وصلى اللهم على سيدنا مولانا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا.